Imagine waking up every day knowing you'll never leave the room you're trapped in. Imagine counting not months, not years, but centuries, stretching endlessly before you. This is the twisted, chilling story of the man sentenced to 750 years in solitary confinement. A sentence so cruel, so unthinkable, it has haunted the corridors of justice ever since. Today we're peeling back the heavy, rusted doors of a prison, built not of stone and metal, but of relentless, soul-crushing isolation, to reveal how one life unraveled into one of the harshest punishments in human history. Who was this man? What did he do? And why was he condemned to spend the rest of eternity utterly alone? Our story begins in the early 1990s, in a town that might have seemed just like any other. Quiet streets, familiar faces, a place where neighbors trusted neighbors, and crime was something that happened somewhere else. But beneath the surface of this ordinary town, a darkness was growing. A young man named Darnell Williams had already begun slipping through the cracks of society. Abandoned by a broken family, passed between foster homes like a bad memory, he learned early on that the world was not a place built for people like him. He knew hunger, he knew betrayal, and he knew the bone-deep ache of being unseen. As he grew older, the anger inside him festered. Darnell wasn't stupid, far from it. He was sharp, clever, and resourceful. But intelligence without hope is a dangerous thing. By the time he turned 17, Darnell had a rap sheet longer than most seasoned criminals. Burglary, assault, car theft. Small crimes at first. Desperate acts of survival. But like a fire left unchecked, they quickly spread into something much more dangerous. Friends drifted away, teachers gave up, society decided he was already lost. On a cold night in November 1992, everything changed. Darnell's anger, once simmering under the surface, exploded into unimaginable violence. It started with a simple robbery, a corner store, a handful of dollars, a desperate attempt to assert control over a life spiraling into chaos. But desperation makes men reckless. And that night, Darnell wasn't alone. He was accompanied by two other young men, equally lost, equally volatile. What began as a robbery turned into a massacre. In a matter of minutes, 3 lives were taken. The store owner, a customer, a police officer who happened to be nearby and tried to intervene. Panic and fear mixed with adrenaline, and blood stained the cold tile floors. When the dust settled, the small town that had once turned a blind eye to Darnell's petty crimes could no longer look away. The trial that followed was swift and brutal. The prosecution painted Darnell as a monster beyond redemption. They showed the jury photos so graphic that several jurors reportedly wept openly in court. Witnesses spoke of the horror they had seen. The defense, underfunded and overwhelmed, could do little but plead for mercy. But mercy, it seemed, had no place in the courtroom that day. The judge, a stern man known for his tough-on-crime stance, delivered the sentence himself. For each murder, Darnell would serve 250 years in solitary confinement. Consecutive. No chance for parole. No interaction with other inmates. No visitors. No end. 750 years. Alone. As the gavel fell, a silence heavier than death itself settled over the courtroom. Some saw justice. Others saw something far more disturbing, a life condemned not just to imprisonment, but to an existence stripped of even the most basic human contact. They say prisons are meant to rehabilitate. But how do you rehabilitate a man you've decided will never again speak to another soul? Darnell's life behind bars became a ghost story in its own right. Locked inside a cell no larger than a parking space, he spent 23 hours a day staring at concrete walls. Meals were slid through a slot in the door. Once a day he was allowed to shower under the watchful eyes of guards who treated him like a dangerous animal. No books, no television, no conversation, just the endless ticking of time, the slow, methodical unraveling of a human mind. The light bulb overhead buzzed constantly. flickering, never letting him fully sleep. His bed was a slab of metal bolted to the wall, with a thin, torn mattress that smelled of mold and despair. Prison staff began to notice changes. First, Darnell spoke to himself, whispered conversations in the dead of night. Then came the hallucinations. He claimed to see figures lurking in the corners of his cell, hear voices that taunted him, laughed at him, begged him for help. Sometimes he screamed for hours, pounding on the walls until his fists bled. Other times he sat motionless, staring into nothingness, a living corpse kept alive only by routine and cruelty. Some guards mocked him. Others turned their faces away, unable to bear the sight. Time in solitary is not measured in days or months. It's measured in what you lose: your mind, your hope, your sense of self. And Darnell lost all three. Years turned into decades. Court appeals came and went, filed by desperate advocates who argued that no human being, no matter how heinous their crimes, deserved to be buried alive. Expert witnesses spoke of the psychological damage wrought by prolonged isolation. They presented brain scans showing shrinkage in areas responsible for emotion and memory. But each appeal was denied. The judges who reviewed his case saw only the blood he had spilled, not the man he had become. Society, it seemed, had decided that Darnell Williams was a monster, and monsters do not deserve compassion. But the story doesn't end there. In 2022, nearly 30 years into his sentence, a group of independent journalists stumbled across Darnell's case while investigating human rights abuses in American prisons. What they found shocked even the most hardened reporters. Medical records revealed that Darnell's physical health had deteriorated to the point where he could barely walk. Psychological evaluations described a man so broken, so disconnected from reality, that he no longer knew his own name half the time. He had attempted suicide 6 times. He had been hospitalized for severe malnutrition, untreated infections, and self-inflicted injuries. Yet still, he remained locked away. The journalists published a scathing expose titled, "Buried Alive, the Forgotten Man of Solitary." The article went viral almost overnight. Public outrage exploded. Human rights organizations demanded answers. Politicians who had long championed tough-on-crime policies found themselves scrambling to explain how a man could be sentenced to a punishment so barbaric it violated the most basic standards of human decency. And then, for the first time in decades, Darnell's case returned to court. This time, the courtroom felt different. The world had changed. People understood now what solitary confinement did to the human mind. Psychologists testified that extended isolation was a form of torture. Former prison guards admitted that keeping Darnell locked away for so long had not made anyone safer. It had only destroyed what little remained of his humanity. Survivors of solitary confinement spoke too, their testimonies painting pictures of nightmares made real. Flashbacks, panic attacks, the inability to recognize one's own reflection. The courtroom was filled with a heavy, almost tangible sadness. After months of legal battles, a federal judge finally ruled that Darnell's sentence violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. He ordered Darnell to be transferred to a general population unit, a chance, however slim, to reconnect with the world he had long since lost. But freedom, even the limited freedom of a prison yard, came too late. By the time Darnell re-entered the world of human contact, he was a shell of a man. He barely spoke. His hands trembled. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, searching for threats that no longer existed. Other inmates treated him with a mix of fear and pity. Some whispered about the ghost man who had spent a lifetime alone. Others avoided him entirely, unnerved by his haunted presence. Staff members, trained to handle violent outbursts, found themselves powerless against a man who reacted not with violence, but with heartbreaking silence. Less than a year after his transfer, Darnell Williams died quietly in his sleep. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but those who knew his story believed otherwise. He had, they said, simply given up. His body remained, but his spirit had long since withered away, eroded by decades of darkness and silence. Today, Darnell's story serves as a grim reminder of the cost of cruelty. His name appears in textbooks and legal journals, cited in debates about prison reform and human rights. His life and his death became a rallying cry for those who believe that justice should not be synonymous with vengeance. But the question remains, was justice truly served that day in 1992? Or did a system built to protect society lose its soul by condemning a broken young man to an eternity of loneliness? We like to believe that monsters are born, not made, that some people are simply evil, beyond redemption. It's a comforting thought. It lets us draw a line between us and them. But stories like Darnell Williams's force us to confront a much darker possibility that sometimes monsters are created, slowly, methodically, through neglect, abuse, and isolation. And when that happens, who bears the greater guilt? As you listen to the ticking clock, as you feel the walls closing in around you, remember this. There are places, even today, where a man can be buried alive without a grave. Places where time itself becomes the executioner. Places where a sentence is not just a punishment. It is a slow, merciless erasure of everything that makes a person human. 750 years in solitary, a twisted story, a haunting legacy, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the true horror lies not in the crime, but in the punishment. If you were the judge, what sentence would you have given instead, and why? Do you believe there are crimes so unforgivable that solitary confinement is justified? Or is it always too far? What do you think damages a person more, the crime they commit, or the punishment they receive afterward?